In any ecology, diversity tends to support resilience, whether economic, cultural, or environmental. At least that's how the theory goes, and up until now, lived experience seems to parallel the same idea. But as the global world order changes and climates go cuckoo and intelligence becomes artificial, are divergences in diversity developing? Thank you for broadening the variety of podcasts you listen to and joining us here on Digesting Food Studies, the show that aims to keep things interdisciplinary, but not all that disciplined, at least when it comes to the food studies multiverse. I'm your talker, typer, editor, designer, tuner, and tradesman, David Santo. This episode is about a lot of things, starting with green sea urchins and industrial ghosts and First Nations fisheries, and ending, well, you'll be the judge of where things actually end, if indeed they do. We're mostly talking about a case study of fisheries diversification, but as so often happens when it comes to food systems, we're going to stray a bit from the main flow. The article in focus comes from Volume 12, Issue 1 of Canadian Food Studies, published in May 2025. Alexia Moyer starts us off with an amuse-bouche segment that offers you a chance to sit back, listen, and imagine yourself somewhere along the shores of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Her voice and words may transport you there for a few minutes, or perhaps they'll inspire an in-person visit so that you can check out the community of creatures she describes. After that, Charlotte Gagnon-Lewis talks to me about how the Wolastoqiyik fishery approached diversification to add green sea urchin harvest to their practices, as we'll hear what may seem like a straightforward effort to build long-term resilience into the fishery was actually a layered and negotiated move that required a great deal of attention and care. And finally, in the aftertaste, Queen's University master's student Adelle D'Urzo Paugh layers in her own research experience and perspectives on working with fishers and thinking through the realities of diversification and livelihoods. Hey Alexia, I have an idea.
What's your idea, David?
I don't really want to talk today. Can you just tell me a story?
I have one for you. The title is The Green Sea Urchin, Not Just a Pretty Face.
Tell me more.
My favorite exhibit at Montreal's Biodome is the Gulf of St. Lawrence ecosystem, and a specific part of that exhibit as well, the part that looks like the shoreline at low tide. And living at the bottom of this shallow water are all manner of invertebrates. It is a treasure trove of starfish, mussels, though these are curiously empty. I think they've been eaten by the starfish. Crabs, sea cucumbers, whelks, and sea urchins, some of them green. I usually have a sweater on hand because, though not as cold as the penguin exhibit, this space is temperature controlled to light jacket weather, just right. I glance over at the deeper water further on, shake off the recurring fear that I or one of my companions will fall in and have an unlooked-for encounter with a sturgeon, a creature I admire, certainly, but preferably from a distance, even though I know they don't have any teeth. I look back to the shoreline and am reminded of a poem by Gwendolyn McEwen called Sea Things, in which she describes shellfish and sponges and those half-plant animal things that go flump-flump on the seafloor. There is a heaviness to this description that seems at odds with the spiny, spherical creature before me. Coordinated, undulating locomotion seems more apt to describe their movement. They don't have eyes, but they are able to detect light stimuli. They don't have brains like those of humans, but their central nervous system allows them to respond to their environment. Their mouths are on the underside of their bodies with 5 teeth, and they excrete waste out of the top. I wonder if some people are similarly plumbed. They will sometimes eat carrion. They like algae most, though, kelp forests. And when their numbers rise, they graze their way through these forests at an alarming rate, upsetting the balance of the shoreline community and sometimes leaving a barren seascape in their undulating wake. Looking at a sea urchin, I don't immediately think about eating it. It may be a textural thing. For this reason, I don't eat hedgehogs either. But were I to go by appearances alone, I might also eschew escargot. But spiny starfish, clearly unbothered by the spines, seagulls, crabs, and lobsters eat sea urchins. And human ancestors too, at least as far back as 43,000 years ago. This is a food source of long standing. Someone, somewhere, more specifically Macpan Cave on Alor Island in Indonesia as an example, saw that little spiky sphere and thought to give themselves a gustatory challenge, particularly in view of the fact that a comparably small number of their species is edible. And, with a little or a lot of prying and scraping, these intrepid eaters were rewarded with the brightly colored reproductive organs inside. I have heard that the taste is somewhat like sea-soaked foie gras or butter or avocado, rich, creamy, and briny too. Perhaps one of the reasons I haven't tasted sea urchin has to do with the fact that out of those fished in the St. Lawrence estuary, much, if not all of the catch is shipped away from Canadian markets. While I can buy Nordic shrimp at my local friterie or independent grocery store, I have yet to see a sea urchin. Questions abound. Not just, why can't I buy these, but who are the individuals and organizations between the sea urchin in situ and my dinner plate? What are the regulations? Is it a good idea to fish them? Is it sustainable? And is this model of sustainability a good one? Or is it overly simplistic?
Those are very beautiful words, Alexia. Thank you. And some very pertinent questions, some of which, but not all, will be answered by our next guest. Thanks so much.
I was hoping they would be. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Charlotte Gagnon-Lewis is currently a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Ottawa. While the article for this episode came about through her master's degree research, she now takes a political ecology lens to the socio-ecological entanglements of food systems, focusing on everyday livelihoods and environmental justice. Well, Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us here on Digesting Food Studies. I'm very excited to talk to you about this really fascinating article that brings so many things together. It's a wonderfully evocative title too, Fishing Amongst Industrial Ghosts. Tell me a little bit about how you got to do this research and what this piece is actually about.
Yes, so thank you for having me. This research is based on my master thesis work, actually, in the pandemic. So I had to find a subject that would be really close to my house.
Okay.
And I wasn't really sure how it would apply. I looked a lot. And while I was living there, I knew there wasn't a very active food scene, but I wasn't too familiar with it. And I found the urchin a bit by luck, I guess, by looking at what was happening, an initiative local chef that around, and someone was talking about the urchin and was talking about this seafood that was a very luxurious produce elsewhere and that we had in the St. Lawrence region, but that we didn't eat. So there was an active fishery here and we were just fishing it and sending it mostly all to Japan, a bit to the US, but mostly to Japan. So this is the problem that led me to doing this research about why do we have this fish, and we have the urchin, but there's many other. I can think of surf clam, I can think of algae. They're all developing right now, but at the time they were a bit more on the ground, I guess.
I mean, this is a fascinating linkage to something that I had heard about earlier, is this incredible availability of sea urchin in the St. Lawrence, and that it's also, as we know it often, if we go to a Japanese restaurant, we know it as uni, but we don't eat it here. It's, again, one of these products that's produced for export exclusively. But it's also kind of wonderful that you came to this very complex and detailed and both theoretical and applied research and article through the mouth, right? Through restaurants and through taste. And so it's a wonderful way that these worlds connect.
And I find it fascinating because there was such this big story about it in my mind, at least at the time. Mm-hmm. But when I was asking fishermen, when I started asking fishermen and people I knew who were fishing the sea urchin, what was the sea urchin for them? What did this represent? My initial research question was on the idea of value. So what was the value of that seafood? The only answer was that it's an economic reason. It's a commodity. We sell it because of fishery diversification. So the only reason they told me they were fishing the sea urchin was if something is to happen to one of the main fishes we fish, in Lower St. Lawrence we mostly fish the snow crab or the shrimp. If something was to happen, we would have the sea urchin on the side and other species that would help us in case of a problem And that way we don't have to start from the ground up. We already have something and we can keep working, like diversifying a bank portfolio.
And of course, diversification is part of resilience in the face of things like environmental or economic or social shocks or challenges. So this idea of diversification as a sort of preparatory move, as an insulation against future shocks. That's where you got to in this article, right?
Yeah, and it's really show for me a kind of understanding from all actors involved of the precarity of this industry, but also a willingness to go forward, of saying we are in this kind of time where climate change, we don't really understand what's happening. It's becoming harder and harder to predict. Global markets are changing and they're changing our condition. And all of this is happening faster than before. So now we're at a time that we need to kind of have somewhat of control over what we can. And we cannot control everything. But by going to go for the sea urchin, by going to go for the common crab, maybe we can gain a little bit of control over what we don't. And that required, I want to emphasize that it required tremendous effort by all those people. I mean, you don't just go and start a new business out of nothing. You need to invest money, but you need to invest effort and you need to try.
Yeah, of course.
And they're all doing this because they realize of the instability of this industry right now. So the article is really about looking at this diversification strategy and saying, is it durable? Are they putting all this effort because at the long term, it will really benefit them? Or is there more barrier and more thing to overcome that we can do to help those actors kind of make their livelihood go further in the future?
That's what I found so compelling, as you say, yes, this is a good strategy. The idea of emergent fishing or emergent fisheries, great. However, when you, of course, dive into it, it gets much more complex, as all things do with food and food systems and fisheries. One of the things I was most struck by in this article was just the basic knowledge of how one harvests sea urchins, because, of course, it's a very different fishing process than harvesting crabs or shrimp. And, of course, you can acquire the knowledge, but if you're trying to adapt to environmental change, you're also needing to think about all of those different elements that go into the adaptation process, which you've done so beautifully in this article. And of course, also, as you pointed out, challenges with policy, challenges with fisheries standards and the Canadian federal government and historical fishing rights of First Nations people. There's so much in this piece. In doing the research, you said that you did this research as a master's student. You're now doing your PhD. Did the article itself, researching and writing the article itself, did it help you think about fisheries or food systems in new ways?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's, as I said, it's my master's thesis. So it's, in some way, it was always figuring out where I wanted to go and what I would have done differently. And I'm still kind of figuring all that out. But I came from a place where I was really enjoying critical food study. And my first instinct when looking at all that was to look at the big motion and to look at the big barriers and to look at the big systemic force of place. And there's plenty. But I think being on the field and talking to these people and writing about it also made me realize all the everyday practice that people did to negotiate with this inside of the system, but in the kind of way that the Wolastoqiyik, so I work with the Wolastoqiyik Wahsipekuk First Nation, the way they approach the urchin, they don't only extract the urchin from the sea, they work with chefs and try to develop a local market. They do a lot of research and development about how to use the sea urchin. They have their own restaurant that just opened actually last month.
Oh, wow.
You can have, it's the first restaurant where you can have sea urchin that is wild and that is from the St. Lawrence and that you can eat it.
That's fantastic.
So they have all this kind of initiative about thinking about the fishery differently, more holistically and in bigger scheme. And all those actors, even the DFO, legislator, the conservationists, everyone was trying to move forward and to negotiate with the kind of heritage, I call them ghosts in the article title. It's not that same concept, but all this kind of heritage that was pondering on them, they try to negotiate with them and do the best that they can. And I think in those daily action, in the daily way that just normal people try to go about it, there's a lot of hope. And that's kind of what in the future I would like to focus more on, not just in my writing, but also in the method and in the epistemological kind of way of approaching project. How do we also represent that as there's not only those systemic barrier, but there's also the way people work against them and they're alive, they're hard to explain because they're situated, but they're there and we should find a way to put them forward.
And they're very dynamic and changeable and super relational. And of course, this is what's so wonderful about your work. It has the markings to me of let's try to figure out the big picture of things and put all sorts of things together. And it really, I think it does a great job of that. So often, when I was doing my master and my PhD, I got accused of trying to take a God's eye view of food systems. It's like, yes, I want to try to understand the big picture. And of course we can't because things are too complex. But nonetheless, you've woven together, as you mentioned, Anna Tsing. She's so compelling with the way she also connects large picture worlds. And Jason Moore's work on the Capitalocene, which I also found fascinating, is the first time that I'd heard about this expression, taking it very much beyond the Anthropocene. And I think that's one of the other pieces of this work that you've done so well, is you've woven together very theoretical stuff and absolute day-to-day relationships in terms of, harvesting sea urchins and making a restaurant. Tell me more about this restaurant. I'm fascinated to know that there is one that's now where we can now eat our own locally grown sea urchin.
Yeah, so that's very, very new, actually. I think it opened last month. It's the Wolastoqiyik Wahsipekuk First Nation. It's situated in Kakuna, which is a very, very small town. It's 2 hours northeast of Quebec City. And they just opened their own restaurant based on their own food that they as a nation traditionally made, but also they have this very, very successful fishing industry. And when we talk about the sea urchin, it's not a traditional Wolastoqiyik produce. It's something they did, as I said, to diversify, but still they're trying to really develop a lively kind of contemporary fishing industry that would be thinking on their own from the ground up. Mm-hmm. So if you go there, please test it. It's very rare, it's very new, and I think it's great. I didn't have the chance to try it myself yet.
I'm going to have to make the trip to Kakuna because I think this is so, potentially minor step, but actually a really significant marker of how food systems can adapt and change and become more realistic as things are changing so rapidly, as you've pointed out. Long ago, I had a student in a food studies course here in Montreal. He's a restaurateur, and he went on to develop a company called Société Originale. And he was looking at how Quebec-based products could become more valorized within the restaurant scene. And sea urchin was one of the foods that he was looking at. And I think he told me he cryovac the sea urchin and treated it in some way that it turned it into a sort of denser substance, a bit like foie gras. But I was curious whether in your research you had heard about any previous efforts to commercialize sea urchin for consumption locally.
So when I was starting my research thesis, there was a way to get sea urchin in Quebec, which is not the Wolastoqiyik way, which are commercially fishing the urchin. There is some, not quite sure of the word in English, but mariculture. It's not aquaculture, but you can kind of gather urchin from outside. And now it's not happening anymore in Quebec. There is some people who can keep doing it, but the MAPAC, the Ministry of Quebec in charge of that, have stopped to grant permission to do this kind of thing.
Okay.
But you can still access to the one that already had the permission from before. So it started to develop in Rimouski, where I was based when I was doing my fieldwork. You could have it at the local food market. So you could buy it in gonade, which is only the part that it's edible. You could buy full whole sea urchin. And at first it was kind of this curiosity that people bought because it was weird, or that people bought because maybe they were from France and they knew what it was and they buy it. And chef got really interested in it. And in Rimouski, there is Chez Saint-Pierre, which is this famous-ish restaurant. The chef is Colombe Saint-Pierre. You can see her at Les Chefs.
Right.
We developed the urchin a lot, did a lot of activities. There is also more restaurants all over that kind of really touched the sea urchin and made it available on television. And IGA, which is the grocery chain in Quebec, have started distributing sea urchin all over Quebec.
Ah, okay.
So you have access to sea urchin. It's very, very little, but the visibility is getting increasingly more. And I don't know if it's because now I'm looking for it. So I see it everywhere.
Right.
But I have this impression that the more I go, the more I see it and the more it's growing. And we have this history in Quebec, at least, of produce that were really rare before and that have now become really popular. If we look at snow crab and at lobster, when my grandparents were there, no one would eat a snow crab. It would be considered as ridiculous. And now in Rimouski, people have it in holiday. People have it at the April, in March. There's line during COVID. There was food line to get those produce. So there's a way to develop those produce, and there's a way the urchin is developing. So yeah, I think that's really kind of inspiring.
So that's very exciting. I do hope that the sea urchin or uni gonad will be coming to an IGA near me because it's such a wonderful, it's a very divisive taste. Of course, lots of people don't like it, but lots of people do. And certainly very highly prized in many places, as you mentioned, in France, but certainly in Japan and among sushi aficionados. So thank you so much for this. It's a great article. As I said, it layers together all these different pieces and draws out connections that I think really point to a lot of wonderful potential future work. What are you working on right now, by the way?
It's a bit different. Now I'm working in Japan. I'm working on small-scale farmers who do productive agriculture.
Oh, wow.
In Japan. But the idea is the same. It's people who do agriculture in kind of a very weird place to do agriculture. And we keep trying every day to make their activity productive and working and alive. So the theme is similar, but the subject is a bit array.
Well, I will look forward to continuing to read you and the way you put things together. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Adelle D'Urzo Paugh is a master's student in environmental studies at Queen's University. For her thesis, she's examining the use of participatory research and survey tools in small-scale fisheries networks.
My name is Adelle D'Urzo Paugh, and I am currently enrolled in the Masters of Environmental Studies program at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. I am completing a thesis-based master's project and have partnered with Local Catch Canada, or LCC, a network of seafood harvesters, non-governmental organizations, and academics focused on building an equitable, community-based seafood system in Canada. By way of knowledge, support, and resource sharing, LCC aims to promote seafood sovereignty, center Indigenous values and knowledge systems, and sustain fishing livelihoods in coastal, river, and lake fishing communities throughout Canada. They graciously welcomed me into their community, and we have since established a wonderful co-learning relationship forged on important principles of reconnection, equity, and meaningful dialogue. My research primarily examines alternative fisheries networks, a relatively recent conceptual development in contrast to the well-established body of literature on alternative food networks, which has traditionally been centered on agricultural initiatives within food studies. Utilizing a community-engaged research approach, I partnered with Local Catch Canada to co-develop a survey tool to aid in their member onboarding process, so they could efficiently gather member information and tailor their initiatives to meet knowledge and resource needs. As such, several themes and topics have emerged throughout the course of our partnership, including socio-ecological systems, small-scale fisheries, fishing licenses, regulations and management, Indigenous fisheries and colonial impacts, as well as community-engaged research approaches and qualitative survey development. The article, Fishing Amongst Industrial Ghosts, The Challenges of Green Sea Urchin Diversification in Eastern Canada, presents several ideas that are relevant to my academic and research interests. In its entirety, this article was an exceptional read that touched on important themes of fisheries management, frameworks, and principles, as well as the socio-ecological nature of fishing and of being a fisher, with the former often greatly undervaluing the latter. This is a recurring theme I've taken note of throughout my literature deep dives, and especially so in the informal conversations I've had with harvesters myself, being the disconnect between management models and the ever-changing environment that small-scale and Indigenous fishers have become so attuned to across generations. My research is forged upon the understanding that each and every fishing community has a unique identity, and thus dismantling barriers requires a non-prescriptive, community-based approach that accounts for local histories, which, as Gagnon-Lewis expertly described, typically and often involves fisheries management and licensing regulations. Each fishery has a context and place-based history that holds the key to understanding their present circumstances, and therefore, alternative fisheries networks like Local Catch Canada and scholars like Gagnon-Lewis and myself are determined to actively listen and engage with these stories to amplify knowledge and resources to forge a path towards more sovereign seafood systems in Canada. This article presents a variety of discussion points that could clearly resonate with readers across several fields in environmental studies and beyond. Gagnon-Lewis provides an exceptional, in-depth recount of the commercial or industrial fisheries management model in Canada, which is a topic I found quite mystifying when I began my research 2 years ago. Therefore, I would highly recommend this article to any individual seeking to understand the various facets and obstacles of commercial fisheries management in Canada. On a broader note, Gagnon-Lewis raises an important point in distinguishing the Anthropocene from the Capitalocene, a critical reframing that accurately captures the disproportionate distribution of environmental hardships, which persist along a continuum not only in Western states but on a global scale, even as the underlying driver of both remains the same. This article introduced me to what I now understand to be the Capitalocene, and I think this reframe is critical to properly contextualizing and discussing the current climate crisis. And on that note, I would like to say that I hope this reflection encourages others to think critically about who holds knowledge, whose stories are told, and how we can all play a role in co-creating more just and sustainable food futures in Canada and beyond.
When times get tough, we often retrench. We hide in our homes and wait for the storm to pass. We simplify, we hunker down, we hold the course. But maybe the opposite is more strategic. Plants that sense threats often produce blooms or spray spores into the winds, doing all they can to distribute their genetics. Just recently, scientists observed that Antarctic penguins are shifting their mating season to adapt to climate change and its cascading effects. So maybe now is the time to diversify ourselves, to grow new body parts, to stretch and twist and bend, running, not walking, towards that uncertain future that lies up ahead. Many thanks to the delightfully divergent Alexia Moyer, Charlotte Gagnon-Lewis, and Adelle D'Urzo Paugh. Your ideas inspire me and make me feel stronger. And the same to Digesting Food Studies executive producers Rachel Engler-Stringer, Laurence Godin, Charles Levko, Phil Loring, and Kristen Lowett. I'm David Santo. A few weeks ago, this show got touted on a CBC Calgary broadcast, and we saw a nice little bump in listenership. If you're getting something from listening, maybe you can share the show with a few members of your own circle, or just like and rate us so that folks who might like to tune in can find us wherever they listen. After all, a podcast with a diverse audience is a podcast with staying power. Whether you are an individual food maker or come from a community of fishers, whether you're a farm family matriarch or have dived headfirst into local food politics, I bet things seem weird right now. If you can diversify your relationships with the world and lean into newness, then great. But if you're feeling just too beaten up by life, I suggest eating your favorite, humble, comfort food. Pasta fagioli, maybe, or, a nice carrot soup. Diversity is great, but so's self-care. Put on your own mask before assisting others.